So I'm realizing that that music, Endless Night, is a very, very good segue to our first speaker this morning because it's Francis Gray and he works nights for the USPS. I will turn this over to Francis.
Okay. My reflection is about rising to the occasion during the pandemic. I'm far from the first person who has observed that the blue-collar postal processing plant where I work is a social environment. Indeed, when people work nights, as many of us do, your schedule is completely out of step with the rest of society. By necessity, while the rest of the world is awake and able to interact with other people, you are sleeping. While the rest of the world is sleeping, you are getting ready for work, at work, or on your way home from work and winding down your day. So kind of by default, your workplace can become a major component of your social life, if not the main component for some people, it seems. I would be slightly less than truthful if I did not acknowledge that part of that social dynamic sometimes involves complaining about other employees or about management, whether justified or not. It's all in the eye of the beholder, very subjective. To share a little bit about my perspective, I was in a relationship for over 20 years in early 2016 when my marriage fell apart and I became separated and later divorced. I took it really hard, made some pretty major missteps, and essentially had a mental health crisis. I was in a very depressed state. I started to get better in large part due to finding this church in early 2017. This church was really crucial to me starting to feel better about my life. In the years since the crisis, I've done a lot of introspection. I've thought a lot about what kind of person I am and how I relate to the world. I feel like having the experience of that crisis and introspection has in some ways toughened me. I feel mentally and spiritually stronger, a little better equipped to handle life's tribulations than I was before. The support and the friendships I've received from this church has been a key part of me getting to where I am today. I feel a lot more comfortable with myself. I'm not really an overachiever, but I'm just searching for my own happiness in my life in my own way. When the pandemic lockdowns started and I started seeing some of the reactions that people across the country were having to social isolation and curtailments on their activities and freedoms to serve the greater good, I had an epiphany of sorts. I realized that my crisis and subsequent introspection had left me rather well prepared for weathering the pandemic. By choice, I live a somewhat spare, Spartan lifestyle in some respects. I don't really cook. I eat quite a lot of oatmeal and PB&Js, and I'm actually rather content with that. So I knew that if I could maintain access to oats, peanut butter, and bread, that I would hopefully survive. But I observed that there are a lot of people in our country who have not done that level of introspection and who are poorly equipped to handle long periods of isolation, social deprivation, and immediate drastic changes to their lifestyle. I made a prediction. It's pretty easy to say. People are not going to be able to handle this well. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew there were going to be a lot of spoiled, rotten Americans with poor coping skills coming unhinged. I had had a personal crisis, and I knew now intuitively, without being able to articulate it very well, that everyone was now going to have their own personal crisis. So I remember at my work that as the pandemic began to take shape in Maine and we started to experience the lockdowns, the curfews, and the widespread business closures, that for a while it seemed like we were getting a new policy update or safety talk almost every 2 days. We were all given a copy of a letter stating that we were essential workers, that along with our name badges, we should show police if we were pulled over going to and from work. I remember remarking as the pandemic was developing that management was at least trying to be responsive to the situation in very uncertain times. that the sometimes twice weekly circulation of the latest government boilerplate gobbledygook became almost a comfort. These people are trying to show leadership. Someone in charge is paying attention to what's happening in the world around us and is doing their best to keep people safe with incomplete information and the meager tools which they've been given. We soon experienced a spike in workload that seemed unrelenting over the course of months. As New York State became an epicenter of the pandemic, there were widespread absences of postal employees there due to infection and illness, and the mandatory quarantining of workers told to stay home due to suspected COVID exposure. These widespread absences meant that there were literally thousands of containers of mail that had to be outsourced to other facilities, such as ours and the one in Scarborough that sorts and processes the mail for Southern Maine. I want to say that overnight, our package sorting volume more than doubled and kept growing. For a period of months, we had all the packages that we possibly could sort, and then some. The amount of overtime offered to every employee was practically unlimited. All the employees were offered 4 hours of overtime on top of an 8-hour shift every day for months. That means every employee could work 12-hour days or more 5 days per week to make 60 hours per week. And we still couldn't get all the mail done every day. Every day there were multiple containers of packages that missed the cutoff that would be delayed for an extra day or more. Everyone was working up to and beyond our full capacity. A whole operation that we typically only do for the 1 month leading up to Christmas was brought back into play. This operation is referred to as the main rack in our internal lingo, but is more properly termed out-of-state first-class parcels. Our overall workload per employee far surpassed what we did last Christmas season. So I would say when we were operating at our peak mail volume, morale was very high. Everyone was working very hard, but people were aware that their jobs are important. The employees know that people are depending on us. For myself, I reveled in the challenge in a way. I would find myself waxing philosophical. As an old comic book person, in love with the colorful costume superheroes I read about so much in my youth, I would muse upon the heroic ideal. What's a hero? A hero is someone who always tries to do what is right for the largest number, the group, the nation, the world, oftentimes and invariably to the point of personal cost and sacrifice. Aware of the greater cost, risk, or threat to others, the heroic individual sees no other choice. The price must be paid. So I felt in my own small way that rising to the occasion at work during the height of the pandemic was my chance to be heroic, just by going to my job and sorting as much mail as I possibly could. We crested on mail volume, and it seemed like it stayed that way for months. But when it starts going down over the days and weeks, usually it's a gradual change you don't notice. It still feels like you're working just as hard. We may not notice because we're not looking at the numbers for mail volume, but management is looking at the numbers. So it almost came as a shock on the first day when we got all the mail done. All the mail went out, no more backlog. We finally got all the way caught up for once. The mail volume finally dropped down to meet the available workforce. The high mucky mucks at the regional or the national level had stopped outsourcing so much New York and out-of-state mail to facilities like ours. It wasn't needed anymore. Our facility, and probably every other postal facility like ours, depends to a large degree on part-timers, entry-level hires who must take the deal on variable hours for a few years before they can become full-timers with benefits, a set schedule, and a guaranteed 40 hours per week. Well, when the mail volume starts to drop down, the workload decreases. What's going to happen to all these part-timers? Their hours are going to be cut, because once the work is all caught up, management has to send the part-timers home. That can translate into these part-timers taking a major hit on their livelihoods as their paychecks start to dwindle from fewer hours. These people have given their life's blood to keep this place afloat during the peak of the pandemic. If your management and the workload starts to drop off, as it must eventually do, on the perpetual roller coaster of up and down mail volume versus nightly available workforce, what do? What management did was they instituted an operational policy change. No official announcement was made as to the reason why, but a discerning observer can start to see the relationship. The policy change was this: the career employees, the full-timers, were now mandated to do their bid jobs. A regular's bid job, which they voluntarily bid on, comes with a guaranteed 40 hours per week in an assigned work area or operation in the postal plant. For example, my bid job is in automated letters, where we sequence all the letters for the carrier's delivery routes through a time-consuming process. Previously, if a career employee is higher in seniority, management would let them work in a different operation of their preference, and part-timers would do the bid job work. So someone like me might be allowed to go throw packages on the racks, and management would have a part-timer do the bid job work in automated letters. If a career employee's bid job work is all done, they're not going to be sent home. They are guaranteed their 40 hours on the clock no matter what. Because the package sorting work is largely unassigned to any bid job, making the regulars do their bid job work pretty much guarantees that the part-timers will get the lion's share of the package sorting work. The policy change has the effect of preserving hours for the part-timers. Now then, about a month ago, the mail volume decreased even further. For 1 or 2 nights, all the work, all the mail, was finished about 6 hours into an 8-hour shift. The part-timers got sent home early without making their expected but not guaranteed 8 hours. For some, this was a welcome respite after all the months of such long hours. But for this trend to continue for very long could really negatively affect their livelihoods. Soon after, another policy change was announced, again with little fanfare. Depending on their work area that night, everyone, full-timers and part-timers, would have their breaks and lunches at set scheduled times. Under the prior regime, it's been a common practice for both the career employees and part-timers to postpone their breaks and lunches until the ends of their shifts. Often employees will take their breaks at a time of their discretion, such as after completing a particular task. If an employee does that or saves all their breaks and lunches until the very end of their shift, the mail may get done earlier, but part-timers may lose hours. By shifting all the breaks and lunches at set times to occur earlier throughout an 8-hour shift, this pushes some of the work later into the shift. Again, this has the effect of preserving the hours for the part-timers to the greatest extent possible. Almost done. Again, these part-timers gave their blood, sweat, and tears to get the mail out during the most critical time so far in the pandemic. And now that the mail volume had dropped off, the management has got their backs. So I feel these people are heroes. These employees really gave it everything they had when times were at their worst. They performed under pressure, and it's nice to know that management doesn't quickly forget who they have to thank, their team who left it all on the field. For us at the postal plant, this was our finest hour.
Thank you, Francis, so much. That was just an amazing look at the inner working of the Postal Service, and it's just so good to hear positive things being